Okay, another variation of a midpoint problem might be, they say, what's the midpoint between 2 and 10? So what you do, and this is not on the coordinate plane, this is just on a number line, and I got 0 here, I got my negative numbers here, and I got my positive numbers here. I'm at 2 and I'm at 10 over here. Okay, so let's say 2 and 10. And they're talking about the numbers in between here. Where would halfway be? The way you do it is exactly the way that you would do the coordinate plane, only 1/2. So like just either the x's or the y's. So you only have to do it once. So 2 plus 10 is 12, divided by 2 is 6. So 6 would be halfway between 2 and 10. And I know my hash marks are not in the right spot, but so you just add the two numbers together and divide by 2, just like we would on the coordinate plane. This is actually an easier problem. I'd forgotten that they were going to ask you these type of questions. Another type of question that's actually harder is when they give you one of the points, let's say it's 1, 3. Then they give you the midpoint. Let's say it's 4, 7. So this is the midpoint, and this is the first point. Then they say, what would the second point have to be? And this is actually an algebra problem. You're going to create two equations and solve them. So what you do to solve this, we're going to set this up and solve it. It's going to be 1 plus x, because we have this first number here plus this second number that we don't know. So 1 plus x divided by 2 is going to equal, normally it's going to equal our answer. Usually we're trying to find this. And that'll be our first equation. So we're going to solve this, and we're going to do a second equation for the y's, and it'll look very similar. So let's go ahead and solve this. So again, we're still taking the two x's and adding them together, dividing it by 2, and it's going to equal the midpoint. But now they're taking a piece out of the middle, out of our problem, and we're solving backwards. The very first thing that you have to do to solve an equation like this is to get rid of the 2. You can't do the plus yet because you have to get rid of the 2. So we're going to multiply both sides of the equation by 2, and these 2's will go away. So I'm going to have 1 plus x equals 8, because 4 times 2 is 8. And then I subtract 1. Oh, I just did that in my head and got 7. So I subtract 1 and I get x equals 7. So the coordinate here has to be a 7. Let's do our y's. Our y's are 3 and some other number that we don't know, and they're going to equal 7. So 3 plus y divided by 2 is going to equal 7. So now we're going to solve this equation. And we always start by multiplying by 2. And we get 3 plus y equals 14. We subtract 3 from both sides, and we get y equals 11. So that means this one had to be 11. So the second point had to be 7, 11, which is not meant. I didn't mean that. It's kind of funny. I used to work at 7-Eleven when I was in college. So to recap, they gave us the first point and they gave us the midpoint, and we solved for the second point. All right, let's try another one of these. This is probably the hardest version of questions that you'll get as far as midpoint goes. Midpoint in itself is an easy concept. It's just sometimes the way they ask questions, it could become more difficult. So let's say we'll put some negatives in this one. Let's say -2, -5. And let's say our midpoint is 3, -1. And we don't know what this other point is. So imagine that it's not going to be like this, but imagine this is what it looks like. So I have a point over here, and I have another point over here, and then halfway in between is this point. So this is our midpoint. This is point 1 and point 2. But we don't know the coordinate of the end point here. And that's what we're trying to find out. So x1, y1. This is our midpoint, so xm, ym. And what we're looking for is our second point, x2, y2. So I'm going to highlight. I'm going to add these two together because I always add x1 and x2. x1 and x2, but I don't know x2, so I'm going to call it x. And I divide by 2, and that always equals our midpoint. So that's 3 in this case. And now I'm just going to solve this equation. So we always start by getting rid of the 2 on the bottom. Multiply by 2 on both sides, and that 2 goes away. So now I have -2 plus x equals 6, because 3 times 2 is 6. Now I'm going to add 2 to both sides, and I get that x equals 8. So that means that this one had to be 8. So we're going to do it again, and we're going to do it with the y's. So I'm going to add -5 and this number, even though I don't know what it is. And I'm dividing it by 2, and that's going to equal this -1 right here, my midpoint for my y's. And now I'm just going to solve this equation. Of course, always first step, multiply by 2. -1 times 2 is -2. Then we're going to add 5 to both sides. -2 plus 5 is +3. So that means this had to be a +3. Okay, I think that'll do it. Hopefully that's enough examples for you to start your assignment, and we'll work out more examples from there.